Beneath the neon lights of Seoul and the quiet echoes of ancient temples lies a story of survival, resilience, and rebirth. South Korea, a nation that today stands at the cutting edge of technology, culture, and global influence, was once a land ravaged by war, divided by ideology, and tested by history's harshest storms. To understand the South Korea we know today, we must journey back through centuries of dynasties and invasions, through the colonial shadows of empire, and into the fiery crucible of the Korean War. This is not just a history of a country. It is the tale of a people who refused to break, who forged identity from struggle, and who transformed their homeland into one of the world's greatest modern success stories. From the legacy of the ancient kingdoms to the miracle on the Han River, from the scars of partition to the rise of K-pop and global innovation, this is the saga of South Korea, told as it has never been told before. Welcome to Asia I Within. South Korea's story begins long before the skyscrapers of Seoul or the clash of modern armies. The Korean peninsula has been inhabited for tens of thousands of years, shaped by tribes and kingdoms that laid the foundations of a distinct cultural identity. Among the earliest of these was Gojoseon, the first Korean kingdom, said to have been founded in 2333 BCE by the mythical figure Dangun. Whether legend or truth, Dangun's story became a symbol of Korea's enduring spirit, an identity rooted in both myth and history. As centuries passed, new kingdoms rose across the peninsula. The era of the Three Kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla, forged the cultural and political DNA of the Korean people. Goguryeo defended the northern frontiers with fierce resilience. Baekje thrived through maritime trade and artistic brilliance, and Silla eventually unified much of the peninsula, ushering in a golden age of Buddhist culture and architecture. From temples carved into stone cliffs to the first printing technologies, Korea was already a land of innovation and beauty. Yet, the peninsula's geography, nestled between China, Japan, and the open seas, meant its history was never free from outside pressures. Cultural exchange brought advancement, but invasions brought devastation. Still, each kingdom rose again from ruin, weaving resilience into the Korean identity. For every fortress toppled, a stronger one was built. For every dynasty that fell, another rose from the ashes, carrying forward the torch of Korean tradition. By the close of this ancient era, Korea had already established itself as more than a battleground between empires. It was a land of kings, poets, monks, and warriors, a place where culture and struggle were inseparable, and where the seeds of South Korea's enduring character had already been sown. After centuries of division and shifting powers, the Korean peninsula entered an era of consolidation. The rise of the Goryeo dynasty in 918 CE marked the first time the name Korea was used, a name that would endure across centuries. Goryeo became known for its artistry, producing some of the world's most exquisite celadon pottery, shimmering green as though touched by jade. Yet beneath the beauty lay constant trials, as foreign invasions and internal strife tested the kingdom's endurance. In the late 14th century, the Goryeo dynasty gave way to a new power, the Joseon dynasty, which would rule for over 500 years. This was an age of Confucian order, where society was bound by hierarchy, scholarship, and tradition. Under Joseon, Korea saw the flourishing of architecture, literature, and governance. Most famously, in the 15th century, King Sejong the Great introduced Hangul, the Korean alphabet. With simple, logical design, it gave ordinary people the power to read and write, breaking the monopoly of knowledge once held by elites. Hangul would become not just a tool of communication, but a symbol of Korean resilience and identity. But even within the grandeur of Joseon, shadows lingered. Factional rivalries fractured the royal court, peasants endured hardship, and the peninsula faced relentless pressure from its powerful neighbors. Invasions by Japan in the late 16th century, known as the Imjin Wars, left scars across the land, though Korean innovation in naval warfare, led by Admiral Lee Sun-sin and his legendary turtle ships, turned the tide. Joseon survived, but at great cost. The Joseon dynasty's longevity spoke to Korea's ability to endure and adapt. For 5 centuries, traditions were preserved, language was strengthened, and cultural achievements flourished. Yet as the world beyond began to industrialize, Joseon's isolation grew dangerous. The peninsula, long a crossroads of empires, was about to face the storm of modernity, and its consequences would be profound. The dawn of the 20th century brought storms unlike any Korea had faced before. As empires stretched their hands across Asia, Korea found itself caught between giants: China, Russia, and Japan. The peninsula, long valued for its strategic location, became a pawn in great power struggles. In 1910, after years of rising influence, Japan annexed Korea, and a dark chapter began. For 35 years, the Korean people lived under colonial rule, stripped of sovereignty and silenced by force. Japan sought not only control but assimilation. Korean language, culture, and history were suppressed. Even the use of Hangul was discouraged in schools. Temples and traditions gave way to shrines of empire, while Korean lands and resources were exploited for Japan's growing war machine. Families were uprooted, farmers lost their fields, and countless workers and women were subjected to hardship and abuse. It was an era where identity itself was under siege. Yet within this shadow, resistance burned. Across the land, secret schools kept Hangul alive, underground newspapers spread forbidden words, and activists risked their lives for freedom. On March 1st, 1919, the March 1st movement erupted, an outcry of independence that filled the streets with protesters waving the Korean flag, demanding liberty. Though brutally suppressed, it ignited a spirit of defiance that would not die. From guerrilla fighters in the mountains to exiled leaders abroad, the struggle for independence became the heartbeat of a nation refusing to be erased. By the end of World War II in 1945, Japan's empire lay in ruins, and Korea was free once more. But liberation came with new uncertainty. The world powers that had clashed for dominance over Korea would not simply walk away. The joy of freedom was clouded by the looming shadow of division, a fracture that would define the peninsula's modern destiny. The end of World War II should have been Korea's rebirth, but instead, it marked the beginning of a painful fracture. With Japan defeated, the Allies stepped into Korea, not as liberators united, but as rivals divided by ideology. Along the 38th parallel, the Soviet Union occupied the North, while the United States took control of the South. What was meant as a temporary measure soon hardened into permanent division, as Cold War tensions carved a single nation into two. In the North, under Soviet guidance, Kim Il-sung rose to power, shaping the Democratic People's Republic of Korea with strict ideology, central control, and military focus. The regime portrayed itself as the true Korea, guardian of independence against imperialism, even as it silenced dissent and consolidated absolute authority. Across the parallel, in the South, the Republic of Korea formed under U.S. support, with Syngman Rhee at its helm. It was a government marked by ambition but also instability, caught between the promise of democracy and the realities of authoritarian rule. Families, villages, and histories were suddenly torn apart by borders drawn on maps, with brothers and sisters separated not by rivers or mountains, but by politics. The air grew heavy with suspicion and propaganda, as both sides claimed legitimacy, both preparing for confrontation. What had once been a unified people now faced an uncertain destiny shaped by forces beyond their own choosing. By 1950, the fragile peace collapsed. Armies massed, alliances hardened, and the peninsula was thrust into one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century, the Korean War. What began as liberation from colonialism had spiraled into division, setting the stage for a tragedy that would scar generations. June 25, 1950. Before dawn broke, North Korean forces surged across the 38th parallel, their tanks and troops driving deep into the south. Seoul fell within days, and the world watched in shock as the peninsula became the first true battlefield of the Cold War. For the North, it was a war of unification. For the South, it was survival. For the superpowers, it was a test of ideology, where communism and democracy clashed not in theory, but in blood. The United Nations, led by the United States, rushed to defend the South. Soldiers from across the globe, from America, Britain, Turkey, Australia, and beyond, fought under the UN flag. Yet in the early months, their defense faltered. Pushed to the edge of defeat, Allied forces made a desperate stand at the Pusan perimeter, holding on by sheer determination. Korea seemed destined to fall, until a bold counterstroke changed everything. General Douglas MacArthur launched the Incheon landing, a daring amphibious assault behind enemy lines. Against impossible odds, it succeeded. Seoul was recaptured, and northern forces were thrown into retreat. Momentum shifted, and soon UN troops pressed toward the Yalu River, threatening China itself. Victory seemed near, but it was an illusion, for China would not stand idle. As winter descended, waves of Chinese soldiers stormed across the frozen hills, driving UN forces back in brutal, bitter fighting. Battles like the Chosin Reservoir became legends of endurance, where soldiers faced not only enemies but the merciless cold. The war seesawed, carving a path of destruction across the peninsula, until, after 3 years of stalemate, the front lines froze once more along the 38th parallel, the very border where it had begun. The Korean War left the peninsula shattered. Cities lay in rubble, bridges twisted over silent rivers, and farmland burned to ash. Entire families were torn apart by the dividing line of the 38th parallel, never to meet again. For South Korea, survival had come at a cost almost too heavy to bear. Millions dead, millions more displaced, and an economy in collapse. The land of morning calm had become a land of scars. In Seoul, streets once alive with markets were lined with ruins. Hunger stalked the people, and children wandered amidst broken walls in search of food. The war had not just destroyed buildings, it had shattered hope. Many doubted the South's very future, wondering if the small, devastated nation could ever rise again, while the North, backed by Soviet and Chinese support, projected strength beyond the border. Yet amid the despair, seeds of resilience took root. Communities pulled together, rebuilding homes with their bare hands. Aid from the United States and the United Nations trickled in, offering not just supplies, but a lifeline. For the South Korean people, the challenge was not merely to survive, but to believe that survival could one day lead to renewal. But the scars of war were more than physical. Families lived with silence. Fathers who never returned, sons lost in distant battlefields, daughters left to hold households together. Trauma became part of daily life, whispered through lullabies and prayers. The people of South Korea bore their suffering quietly, but beneath the silence was a burning will. Out of the ruins, they would forge something stronger than rubble, the unyielding determination to reclaim their future. From the ashes of war, South Korea entered a fragile era of survival. The economy staggered, politics were unstable, and the fear of another invasion lingered like a shadow. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, strong men rose. Men who promised stability, security, and order, even at the price of freedom. Syngman Rhee, South Korea's first president, clung to power through repression and manipulation. His government silenced critics, crushed uprisings, and wielded fear as a tool of control. Corruption spread through the halls of power, even as the people yearned for a system that could heal the wounds of war. Rhee's downfall in 1960, after mass student protests, opened the door to hope, but that hope was short-lived. In 1961, the military stepped in. General Park Chung-hee seized power in a coup, declaring that only discipline and authority could save the nation from collapse. Under his rule, South Korea became a state driven by order, sacrifice, and relentless ambition. Dissent was crushed, the press censored, and opposition silenced. Yet Park's dictatorship was not built on repression alone, it was also built on vision. For beneath the iron grip of control, South Korea's transformation began. Park demanded sacrifice, but promised prosperity. Factories rose where fields once stood. Roads and bridges stretched across the land. The foundations of an industrial nation were being laid, though the cost was heavy. Freedom suppressed, lives controlled, voices silenced. South Korea was caught in a paradox, trading liberty for survival and oppression for progress. From dictatorship's iron grip emerged a transformation that stunned the world. What was once one of the poorest nations on earth began to surge with an energy unlike any other. South Korea, scarred by war and restrained by repression, harnessed its hunger for survival and turned it into ambition. Out of hardship, the seeds of prosperity were sown. Factories became the heartbeat of the nation. Shipyards roared, steel mills burned, and assembly lines moved with relentless pace. Men and women labored long hours, driven by duty and the promise of a better tomorrow. Their sweat built not just goods for export, but a new identity for Korea, a nation no longer defined by war, but by creation. Foreign aid and loans were poured into the country, but it was South Korean determination that turned them into engines of progress. Park Chung-hee's vision, though authoritarian, fueled this economic revolution. Roads, railways, and power plants connected the land, while companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG began their journeys as global giants. What the world would later call the miracle on the Han River was not a miracle at all. It was sacrifice, discipline, and unyielding drive. But progress carried its burdens. The working class bore the weight of endless labor. Dissent was still silenced, and freedom remained chained. Yet, for many, the dream of prosperity was enough to endure the hardship. South Korea was becoming something new, a nation that had clawed its way from ashes into the dawn of modern power. The skyline of Seoul rose higher, and the spirit of its people burned brighter. The world was beginning to take notice. The engines of industry had transformed South Korea's economy, but its people longed for more than wealth. They hungered for freedom. Beneath the neon lights of Seoul, a quiet resistance grew. Workers, students, and citizens began to question the price of prosperity under authoritarian rule. Economic power could not mask political silence forever. The 1970s ended with Park Chung-hee's assassination, but hope for democracy was short-lived. Military generals seized power, and repression continued under Chun Doo-hwan. Protests erupted across the nation, nowhere more fiercely than in the city of Gwangju. In May 1980, thousands gathered to demand democracy. They raised their voices in defiance, only to be met with bullets, batons, and blood. The Gwangju uprising became a massacre, but also a symbol, a cry that would echo for decades. The regime sought to bury Gwangju beneath fear, yet the memory refused to die. Each protest, each strike, carried the weight of that sacrifice. The people of Korea, once subdued, now grew bolder. Students marched through the streets, workers rallied in factories, and the world began to watch. The fight for democracy was no longer a whisper. It was a storm building strength. By the late 1980s, the tide could no longer be held back. Massive demonstrations filled Seoul in 1987, forcing the government to yield. At last, the promise of free elections became reality. It was not an easy victory, nor was it complete, but it marked the beginning of South Korea's rebirth as a true democracy. From the blood of Gwangju to the ballots of Seoul, the people had claimed their voice, and with it, their destiny. The dawn of democracy opened a new chapter for South Korea, one written with ambition and resilience. Freed from the grip of dictatorship, the nation's spirit surged. Its economy, already known as the miracle on the Han River, now stood on a foundation of both innovation and liberty. The scars of past struggles remained, but they fueled a determination to build not only prosperity, but identity. Through the 1990s and 2000s, South Korea rose as a global power. Its cities transformed into gleaming hubs of technology and commerce. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG became household names across the globe, symbols of a nation no longer defined by war or survival, but by progress. The world took notice. This small country, once devastated by invasion and poverty, was now shaping the future of technology and trade. Yet South Korea's influence reached beyond machines and markets. It touched culture itself. From the soulful rhythms of K-pop to the gripping narratives of Korean dramas, a wave of creativity swept across continents. Hallyu, the Korean wave, became more than entertainment. It was a declaration of presence. South Korea's culture was no longer confined to its borders. It was global, magnetic, and transformative. Today, South Korea stands as both a memory of struggle and a vision of resilience. Its democracy remains imperfect, its challenges many, yet its story continues to inspire. From the ashes of colonialism and war, from the shadows of dictatorships, South Korea has emerged as a nation that commands the world's attention. The journey was not easy, but it forged a people unyielding, a culture radiant, and a legacy still unfolding. The story of South Korea is more than history. It is a reminder of how struggle, resilience, and hope can transform a nation. From the ashes of occupation and war to the heights of technology and culture, South Korea has shown the world that identity cannot be erased and spirit cannot be broken. And this is just the beginning. Across Asia, countless stories wait to be told of empires, revolutions, traditions, and the people who shaped them. Each tale is a thread in the vast tapestry of a continent that has always carried the weight of history and the promise of tomorrow. This is Asia I Within, where the stories of Asia live, breathe, and inspire. If you found this journey meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. Because here, the past is never gone. It lives within us all.